how exactly did humans invent guns? And, the wildest part of this whole centuries-long story is that the single most consequential chemical discovery in the history of human conflict didn't start with war at all. It actually started with a quest for eternal life. It was literally a search for immortality that accidentally created the ultimate weapon of death.
So picture this. It's the 9th century, right? You're somewhere high up in the mountains of China's Sichuan or Shanxi province. A group of Taoist alchemists are in their labs, mixing up different minerals, and I cannot stress this enough. They have absolutely zero interest in warfare. They're just trying to brew an elixir of immortality. But instead of discovering how to live forever, they stumble onto a combination of powders that just explodes. The early historical records for this actually mentioned singed beards and burned down workshops, which paints a pretty comedic, if entirely chaotic picture of how that very first encounter with an explosive mixture actually played out. What's really fascinating here is the name they ended up giving this volatile new mixture. They called it Hua Ya, which translates directly to fire medicine. It carries this slight, almost embarrassing memory of its original purpose as a completely failed pharmaceutical potion. I mean, for generations, this stuff wasn't considered a weapon at all. It was pure spectacle. Ordinary people in China mostly just saw this stuff used for festival fireworks, smoke signals, and brightly colored additions to religious ceremonies.
Okay, so to understand how we get from pretty fireworks to actual firearms, we have to talk about the chemistry of that accidental discovery. By weight, they eventually hit upon this rough ratio. 75% potassium nitrate, better known as saltpeter, mixed with 15% charcoal and 10% sulfur. The saltpeter is absolutely the magic ingredient here. It acts as a rapid oxidizer. When you heat it, it releases oxygen incredibly fast, feeding a combustion reaction that produces a sudden, violent expansion of gas. And that rapidly expanding gas, that is the secret engine behind everything a firearm would ever become.
Section 1. The Pragmatism of War, from Fireworks to Fire Lances. Moving into the Song dynasty, so we're talking between the 10th and 12th centuries, military commanders finally start to see the terrifying potential of all that expanding gas. They developed something called the Huo Qiang, or fire lance, and the design of this thing was brutally simple. You just strap a bamboo tube to a spear, pack that tube full of gunpowder, and light it when you get into close combat. Suddenly, your basic polearm is spewing actual flame and burning debris right into a melee. During the 1132 siege of Dian, defenders used these against climbers, and the psychological shock was just devastating. Just imagine training your entire life to fight with swords and shields, only to face an enemy who is projecting literal fire at you. Now, the absolutely crucial turning point is what happened next. Innovation started to accelerate, and military engineers made a massive conceptual leap. They started stuffing small pellets and little shards of pottery into those bamboo tubes right alongside the gunpowder. Actually, think about what a game changer that is. This wasn't just about blowing fire anymore. The whole purpose of the weapon shifted from pure intimidation and burning to causing physical, penetrating injury delivered from a distance. That right there, that is the foundational concept of every single firearm on Earth. But, well, that brings up a rather explosive problem for the engineers of the time. What happens when the pressure from that expanding gas becomes too much for the bamboo to handle? The answer is pretty grim. The weapon just bursts apart in the user's hands, severely injuring the very soldier trying to wield it. Bamboo, as it turns out, simply could not handle the pressure of these new, more powerful gunpowder charges. The big solution to that pressure problem finally arrived in the 13th century, when Chinese craftsmen figured out how to cast bronze tubes that were strong enough to safely contain it. And boom, we have the birth of the hand cannon. By using metal barrels, they could harness all that expanding gas to launch a single, solid projectile with unprecedented force and range. This was a massive, massive technological leap in reliability.
Section 2. The Accidental Delivery, Mongols and the Siege.
We really can't talk about the global spread of guns without talking about geography, and specifically the Mongols. When the Mongols invaded China in the 1200s, they ran headfirst into these gunpowder weapons, most notably at the Siege of Kaifeng in 1232. But rather than just getting defeated by this terrifying new tech, they did what they did best. They absorbed it. As they established the Yuan dynasty and pushed westward across Asia toward the Islamic world, they took the gunpowder with them. The brutal Mongol conquests essentially acted like this massive accidental technology transfer system, spreading a Chinese invention completely across the breadth of Eurasia way faster than any trade caravans ever could have. And the butterfly effect of those alchemists making a mistake in the mountains became incredibly apparent once the technology hit Europe. I mean, for centuries, military power was defined by expensive armored knights and traditional castles with these tall, thin stone walls designed to stop ladders. But suddenly, an armored knight is highly vulnerable to a cheap gunpowder weapon that can punch straight through steel armor, and those tall, majestic castle walls, they were completely, dangerously obsolete against cannon fire. European architecture had to completely transform, which gave us the Star Fort, these lower, sharply angled, thickly reinforced walls designed specifically to absorb and deflect cannonballs, rather than just standing tall and hoping for the best. Section 3. Solving the firing problem. The mechanics of shooting. Now, early European hand cannons were incredibly crude. Try to imagine the sheer clumsiness of this for a second. You're holding a heavy metal pole, maybe weighing up to 25 pounds in some of the later configurations. You load it from the open end, and then to fire it, you have to manually touch a smoldering ember to a tiny little touch hole on the barrel. How on earth do you aim at a moving target on a chaotic battlefield when you need one hand to just hold the heavy gun up and your other hand to hold a burning piece of cord? Honestly, it required intense coordination and a lot of wild optimism. This 400-year timeline gives us a great bird's-eye view of the mechanical progression engineers went through to iteratively solve that exact firing problem. It's an incredible journey, starting from the matchlock in the late 15th century, to the wheel lock, then the flintlock, and finally ending up at the percussion cap in the 19th century. And the cool thing is, every single step forward basically just fixed a fatal flaw of the invention right before it. The first truly major breakthrough was the matchlock. On paper, it seems like a really modest tweak, but honestly, it was completely transformative. They added a curved clamp, called a serpentine, that held a slow-burning cord right on the weapon itself. When you pulled a trigger, a mechanism would lower the lit cord directly into a pan of powder. For the very first time in history, a soldier could actually hold and aim a gun with both of his hands. The idea spread like wildfire. The Ottoman janissaries were using them super effectively by 1510, and Portuguese traders brought them over to Japan by 1543, where local gunsmiths perfected them into the highly prized Tanegashima. But as great as it was, the matchlock had some massive flaws. It required an open flame, burning at all times. It was totally useless if it started raining, and that glowing cord basically screamed, "Here I am," in the dark, giving away your position. The wheel lock solved this for cavalry by using an incredibly expensive spring-loaded wheel to generate sparks. No open flame needed, but the ultimate reliable solution came from a French gunsmith named Marin Le Bourgeois around 1610. He hit the nail on the head with a flintlock. It used a simple spring-loaded hammer holding a piece of flint to strike steel and create a shower of sparks. It was weather-resistant, it hid your position at night, and it was so good it dominated battlefields for roughly 2 whole centuries. Section 4. The Infantry Revolution, combining sword and gun. So because early muskets took such a long time to reload, a musketeer was essentially defenseless right after firing. They absolutely needed pikemen, soldiers carrying these massively long spears, standing right next to them in these elaborate, highly choreographed pike and shot formations, just for protection. But then in the late 17th century, we get the invention of the socket bayonet. Unlike the older, clunky plug bayonets that jammed right into the barrel, this new socket attached securely around the outside of the barrel using a metal ring. This meant you could fix your blade to the end of the gun and still shoot normally. This one elegant little accessory literally turned every single soldier into both a shooter and a spearman at the same time. Pikemen became completely obsolete practically overnight, which fundamentally simplified how armies all over the world organized themselves. The flintlock's epic 200-year reign finally came to a close in the early 19th century with the arrival of the percussion cap. This was a tiny little metal cap containing a highly shock-sensitive chemical compound that ignited instantly the moment it was struck by a heavy hammer. It was brilliant. It completely eliminated the need for loose powder, flints, and open priming pans altogether. It was really the final ignition innovation that rendered all those previous complicated mechanisms totally obsolete. Section 5. Accidental Innovation, 800 Years of Progress. So, stepping back and looking at this whole shebang, what's truly fascinating is realizing that the firearm was never some dramatic eureka moment from a singular genius who just sat down one day and decided to invent a gun. Not at all. It was more like an 800-year relay race. It started with a literal mistake by monks in China, evolved through harsh, practical military pragmatism, was physically carried across continents by Mongol conquerors, and was then iteratively refined by Ottoman, Japanese, and European craftsmen.
It was this astonishing accumulation of knowledge, like a giant global puzzle pieced together across multiple cultures, that slowly but surely reshaped the balance of global power.
Which leaves us with this final, slightly provocative question to chew on. If a simple, totally failed immortality potion in a random 9th century mountain lab accidentally ended the era of knights, completely reshaped the architecture of the world, and redefined human conflict forever, it really makes you wonder, right? What everyday accidents, failed experiments, or weird little chemical reactions happening in modern labs right now are quietly planting the seeds of our own distant future? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I really hope this gives you a completely new perspective on the deeply accidental, totally fascinating history of human innovation.